Hello there, thrill seekers, and for today's Friday flashback, I have a real unusual one. This is me giving a talk in Monmouth University in West Long Branch, New Jersey in March of 2009, I think March 27th, anyway, March of 2009, and I am in Buddhist robes, and I'm talking about the meaning of Buddhist robes, which is something I don't do very often. I'm not sure I would say exactly what I say in this video now, if you ask me, but it might be interesting to watch. And then, as a bonus, the next question is about the nature of mind. So, again, not sure I would answer it exactly the same way now as I did then, but I think maybe the answers from the past have a kind of validity of their own. So, let's take a look at me in robes talking about robes.
I said a lot of what I have to say, and I'm still dressed in the silly costume. Anybody have any questions? You can talk with your mouth full. I will be upset.
Actually, I have a question.
You got a question? Good.
Can you just talk a little bit more about that, since you're talking about the robes, about sort of the reverence for these robes and why you don't kind of join that crowd?
Well, I'm getting more comfortable with it. There's a lot of reasons to not wear the robes, and there's a lot of reasons to wear them. When you put them on, somebody said a word they used, and I can't remember the word because it was one of those college words. But somebody said the robes sort of circumscribe is the word or something. They your activities. So if you put on these robes, you sort of are forced into a certain role. There's certain things you can't do. You can't walk in the back room of the video store in these robes. I guess you could, but people would really notice that. You can't be kind of anonymous in the robes. And so they sort of do that. That chant I did before I put them on. It says great robe of liberation, a formless field far beyond form and emptiness, wearing the Tathagata's teaching, wearing Buddha's teaching, I save all beings. This is phrase. So there's a certain kind of, you're sort of forced into a role. You're also seen in a certain way when you wear these that separates me from the people I'm talking to. That's the main thing I don't like about it, because it makes me seem to be like the special guy, and then everybody else I'm talking to can learn the great wisdom. I'll tell you a story that sort of relates to this, and was one of the reasons I don't like the robes. And when I was 19 or 20 years old, after I'd gotten introduced to the Zazen practice, I was looking at some other stuff because I was very interested in spirituality. So one of the groups I started hanging around with was the local Hare Krishna group that would come to Kent State University and do talks and give you delicious food. If you want delicious food, the Hare Krishnas have delicious food. So they give these great spiritual talks and have this great delicious food. And I remember, and they wore these robes, well, kind of similar robes. Theirs are orange, right? Shaved head, so. And I remember I was sitting at, it was after a dinner, and we're having the talk, and the Hare Krishna guy is in his robes, and we're sitting on the ground, and he's kind of elevated up above us in a stool, and he's delivering his speech. And I remember thinking, wow, I would just love to sit here forever and absorb this wonderful spiritual truth. I had that idea. It was a few years later, so this didn't happen immediately right after that, but a few years later, I'm looking through the paper, and there's that guy who I'd sat at the feet of, thinking that, and he's wanted in conjunction with a murder in West Virginia in the paper. Like, oh, that's what the robes do for you. But that really, it turned out he was never accused of committing the murder or or being part of the murder, but he was part of a group of people because the murder was associated with the Hare Krishnas, and the Krishnas were trying to cover it up. So he was one of several people who was working to get the murder out of the country, unseen by authorities and stuff. But still, it was a pretty big shot, and it kind of soured me on the whole idea of the great spiritual master in his robes going to give a talk. He talks like this and says, "The truth of the reality is the nature of whatever it is." So that kind of made me think I don't want to ever make myself into that. There are other reasons for wearing the robes. I talked to this woman named Tonan O'Connor, who is the head of the Milwaukee Zen Center. And I was talking to her about this, and she wears the robes all the time. And she's kind of this 70-year-old Midwestern woman with very short hair, but not shaved head. And she said when she wears the robes, it's sort of like she feels like she's giving people the permission to talk about like very deep subjects, spirituality, if you want, with her, where they might not feel comfortable talking about that to somebody else. So I can say, okay, well that's okay, I can get that. Although sometimes I don't want to talk about spirituality to people. I don't want to talk about that. So just the idea of making it into like the special guy who gets to wear the robes. I've never really been fond of that whole genre of people. Now I'm one. So it kind of makes you fat. Bunches up. Really boring.
Where's the nature of the mind from it?
Nature of the mind?
Yeah.
Wow. That's a good question. Well, when you say mind, it means a lot of things, right? That phrase that got me very interested in Zen to begin with was form is emptiness, emptiness is form. And there's a million interpretations of that, but one of the interpretations of it is that mind is something, usually I think, and I may be getting it wrong in the case you're asking it, but mind, we make a big distinction. Western philosophy makes a very clear distinction between mind or spirit and matter. It's because, and that distinction wasn't always there. But early on, our philosophies and things tried to mix spirituality and materialism, and that caused problems. It caused all kinds of stuff to happen where people were believing absurd things based on what the church had taught them to believe, and so on and so forth. So there became a split that we could assign one to one side. We'll talk about matters of spirituality, and on the other side we'll talk about things to do with matter and physical stuff. So science developed out of that. Science develops as its own thing and materialistic philosophy develops as its own thing that never really even addresses spiritual stuff or mind stuff. Except as we've gone further, as everybody I think knows, as they've kind of gone further into the realm of science, they're starting to discover that mind actually plays a role in material reality, which had been the assumption had been for hundreds or thousands of years that it played no role in it, that it was completely separate. And now they're finding out it's not separate. On the other hand, you have spirituality, which is one of the ways they study mind, or one of the ways they study spirit, or this kind of ephemeral something that we experience, but we can't quite put our fingers around because it's experience. There's something witnessing what's going on, and we don't know quite what that is, and we call it mind. But if you try to make a philosophy that only addresses mind, then this also gets into an absurd area where you're, in the early 20th century, it got so absurd that people were like, I can't remember who this was, but they were trying to measure people's bodies, the weight of a person's body at the time of death, so they could find out how much the soul weighed, or something like that. There were experiments like this going on, where you say that there's something, that there's a spirit inside the body that's separate from the body and leaves the body when it dies or something. Well, in Buddhism they say mind is body and body is mind, which is another way of saying form is emptiness, emptiness is form. And the nature of mind is that, let's see, Buddhist, I'm getting a little deep here, but I don't know. In Buddhist philosophy, there's a formula called the 12-fold chain of codependent co-origination, but not exactly codependent in the way you say codependent, but it depends on each other. And it's a chain of how reality manifests. And what's interesting to me in that chain is that it is not the way we usually think of it in what we call common sense, which is that the mental stuff is considered more fundamental or earlier in the process than the physical stuff. So, for example, in terms of the Buddhist formula for understanding how reality works, like if I touch this chair, the feeling of touching the chair is more fundamental even than the chair itself, is the idea. That out of the feeling of touching the chair manifests the chair. It's a very bizarre way of thinking of things. But most of this is sort of absurd philosophical stuff that you don't really need to worry about. But it's a different way of conceptualizing stuff. So what the nature of mind is what it always comes down to is ineffable. Is the word my teacher likes. He loves that word because it's something you can't. No matter how hard you try to describe it, you can't really describe it. It's just something. We all know it exists, and we're all familiar with it, very familiar with it, but it's not something you can kind of pin down. And it's kind of a very fundamental part of the universe. Wow. It sounded